Well, hi everyone, and welcome to program. Today, I would like to accentuate and indeed emphasize on idiomatic comparisons. These are considered to be great score enhancers, particularly for speaking module. So let me just cover up the very first idiom of the evening, and here we are. So the first one is as black as coal. For instance, we have seen Indians and Italians hair color is as black as coal. Number two I would like to give you would be as blind as bat. For instance, we have seen sometimes under the spell of liquor, some people, the way they drive their vehicles, they in fact become as blind as bat. Number next I would like to have here, which is as bold or as brave as lion. I think we have seen our respective soldiers who are brave hearts and they are as bold as lion. Number next I would like to bring up is as bright as the day. For instance, we have seen all our students when they fly abroad and they can expect a future which is as bright as the day. Next, I would like to have here as brisk as butterfly. We can see here if you want to reduce your weight instantly, you need to do some good jogging, and that can be done obviously as brisk as butterfly. Next is as brittle as glass. For instance, we can see that yes, our lives and our characters are as brittle as glass. Sometimes even a minor scratch can ruin it off. Now, the next I would like to bring up is as busy as bee. We can see students these days as they are so much busy in their lives. In fact, we can see that they are as busy as bee. Next, I would like to bring up is as changeable as moon, which keeps changing itself. We have seen sometimes there are people who are quite baffled and confused, and I would say fickle-minded, whose decisions are as changeable as moon. Next, I would like to bring up is as cheerful as lark, a bird. I think no matter what happens in your life, you still need to always remain as cheerful as lark. Next, I would like to bring up is as clear as crystal. Well, I think after attending the lecture, the concept was as clear as crystal. Next is as cold as ice. We have seen how many Western countries of the world, perhaps in winters, become as cold as ice. Next is as cunning as fox. We have seen a country like China and perhaps its Communist Party, which indeed is considered to be as cunning as fox. Now, it is in negative connotation. Next is as dark as night. I think the people who indulge into bad works, the ones who get into criminal activities, their future would be always as dark as night. Next, I would like to bring up is, yes, as deaf as post. We have seen sometimes there are people who become so deaf, sometimes they just get too much influenced by people around and they become as deaf as post. Next, I would like to bring up is as dry as dust. We have seen in extreme summers, well, obviously places like deserts, which indeed become as dry as dust. Next, I would like to have here, which is as dumb as statue. We have seen some of our politicians in our country who indeed are as dumb as statue. Next, I would like to have here as easy as ABC. For instance, some hospitality management courses are as easy as ABC. Next, I would like to have is as fair as rose. I think you always should have a fair practice and it should be always as fair as rose. Next is as fast as hare. Now that's rabbit. For instance, we have seen some of our racers in the country who could run as fast as hare. Next, I would like to bring up is as firm as rock. We have seen how the judge's decision in the Supreme Court remains always as hard as grave, and as I would say as firm indeed. And this is very important also. So that's why I reiterate as firm as rock. Next, I would like to bring up here as free as air. I think there are certain commodities in the world which are gifted by the nature, and these are as free as air. Next, I would like to bring up, which is as gentle as lamb. We have seen some of the politicians in the country, very few in number rather, who are as gentle as lamb. Next, I would like to have here as good as gold. Rarely we come across people, whose heart is indeed as good as gold, as they have compassion for humankind. Next, I would like to bring up is, yes, as graceful as swan. So we have seen some speakers of the world are as graceful as swan because they always remain so elegant in their approach. Few next. I would like to bring up the next one, which is indeed as greedy as wolf. To become successful in the world, sometimes you need to have killing instinct, and this way you should be sometimes as greedy as wolf. Next is as green as grass. We have seen, obviously, Switzerland is one of those countries of the world which always remains as green as grass almost 12 months in a row. Next I would like to bring up is as hard as stone. We have seen terrorists and criminals whose heart is always as hard as stone. As we can see, they have no mercy for anyone in the world. Next is as heavy as lead, which is very heavy substance. For instance, we have seen some people who put on too much of weight, and obesity is a crippling global problem of the world, and they become as heavy as lead. Next is as hot as fire. We have seen some parts of the world in extreme summers become as hot as fire, as it is so blazing and so scorching. Next is, obviously, I would like to bring up as innocent as dove. We have seen people in the rural corridors are at times as innocent as dove. Next few, well, it is as light as air. For instance, we have seen sometimes there are people who reduce their weight and apply or maintain size 0. They look almost as light as air. Well, as loud as thunder, which means very loud. For instance, we have seen some predictions made by some of the world leaders were in the past as loud as thunder. Next, I would like to bring up is indeed as obstinate as Mio. We have seen sometimes there are people in the world who become so rigid and sometimes fanatic and rather as rigid as Mio. Next is as proud as peacock. We have seen people who do great work for the world and their parents would always remain as proud as peacock. So let the country say with greatest privilege and pride that you have done something so compassionate and so, I would say, promising for the entire world. Next is indeed as quick as thought. Well, you have to take some decisions in your lifetime which should be taken as quick as thought. Next indeed, as regular as clockwork. Being students, I think it's so important to be always as regular as clockwork. Next few, as round as ball. Planet Earth's circumference is almost as, round as ball. Next is as sharp as needle. Sometimes there are people in the world who become so sarcastic and their comments are as sharp as needle. Next I would like to have here, which is as soft as butter. We have seen, sometimes, there are people in the world, whose communication process remains so elegant and they speak very softly, which is indeed as soft as butter. Next is, obviously, I would like to give you, which is, yes, as sure as death. As we can see, some news are as sure as death. Last few. Next is as sweet as honey. We have seen some singers whose voice is so euphonious and melodious, and it is indeed as sweet as honey. Next is, as warm as wool. We can see sometimes we can meet certain people in the world who are very warm and cordial and rather as warm as wool. And I would like to now zero down to the last one, as white as snow. We have seen right now there are some parts of the world which indeed are suffering from freezing conditions and they are as white as snow. Also, we have seen sometimes there are people whose complexion is quite white and fair and they're always as white as snow. So this brings us to the end of idiomatic comparison lecture. Trust me, this all will definitely help you to improvise your bands in IELTS and your language becomes highly articulative, impressive and very convincing indeed. Thank you so much. Have a very great time.